I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. Conservative, not bitter indeed. It is a pleasure to have you joining us today on this very short, well, not very short, slightly shortened holiday week. Independence Day is on Friday. We will be here tomorrow. We will not be here on Friday. Well, there will be an encore episode of the program, but we won't be here for a new episode Friday. We will be celebrating Independence Day. We won't be refusing to celebrate like these angry, unhinged leftists are. We won't be sulking. We won't be throwing temper tantrums. By the way, we celebrated Independence Day. We celebrated Independence Day even when President Bribery was in office. We celebrated Independence Day when Barack Obama was in office, or Trump was the first time. We celebrated it with George W. Bush. We celebrated it when Clinton was in office. We celebrated it when George H.W. Bush was in office, when Ronald Reagan was in office. I was alive when Carter was in office. I was a little baby, so I can't speak as to what happened in those days, but I'm pretty sure my family celebrated Independence Day when Carter was in office as well. I wish people on the left would grow up and take note of that simple reality that most people live by. But anyway, that is what we're doing. Later on this week, I want to talk about the one big, beautiful bill which has now passed in the Senate. It was a tie vote. J.D. Vance cast the tie-breaking vote, sending the bill back to the House of Representatives because, of course, they made changes in the Senate, and the House now has to adopt the Senate version of the bill. They have a self-imposed deadline of Independence Day, so I haven't read yet as to exactly when this will be voted on in the House. But remember, the original bill only passed the House by one vote, 215 to 214, with one abstaining back here a couple of weeks ago, May 22nd. Anyway, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the political implications of this. I want to talk about this objectively as best I can. I want to talk about my perspective on this. I want to talk about some of the fallout that's been created by this between Trump and Elon Musk. Elon Musk is out there saying he wants to start a third party, which ironically is something that Democrats, almost half of Democrats, say that they want a third party so they don't have to vote for Democrats or, I guess, Republicans either. So this is just crazy times that we live in, but I want to walk through this with you, make the most sense of it that we can, my friends. Before I do that, though, let me remind you this program brought to you in part by our friends at Soltea, Soltea, Soltea.com. You know, we have this program transcribed. In fact, it's being transcribed right now as I speak. Technology is an unbelievable thing, and the technology is pretty accurate. But no matter how I try to pronounce Soltea, it puts salty in the transcription. So I'm trying to get that fixed. It's not salty, it's Soltea, Soltea. It is a supplement that is designed to give you optimal heart health. This has been proven. This supplement has been proven by science. For those of you who are pro-science, which of course includes conservatives, the pro-science crowd knows that when science truly speaks and isn't just being used to manipulate people or deceive people or mislead them or whatever, when science truly speaks like it did in this research, it means something. It means that it's actually been proven to have a positive effect, and it can have a positive effect on you as well. I take the product. You can get it at a discounted rate by being a listener of this program. Soltea.com, Soltea, promo code Todd. You got to use that to get your 50% savings on your first supply, your first order, and you will get free shipping on top of that. Soltea.com, promo code Todd. That's Soltea, Soltea.com. All right, let's talk about the one big, beautiful bill. I'm going to go through the key provisions, the key parts of this legislation. I'm going to try to be as objective. I will tell you my thoughts. You know that I can resist it. I know some people can't resist sharing their thoughts. I can. I know some of you might find that surprising. I will tell you my thoughts a little bit later in the program, but I want to give you, as best I can, an accurate depiction of what this legislation does. So let me start by talking about the tax implications, the tax and fiscal implications. Number one, it permanently extends the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act across income brackets. So you may have heard people saying that the taxes, were going to go up. It's not that Congress was looking to raise taxes. It's that previous tax breaks were set to sunset, were set to expire unless congressional action is taken to extend those. And they are going to permanently extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act across all income brackets. That's what this legislation does. Now, what's interesting here is you'll note the word permanently. That means that the tax cuts will be in place until a future Congress and a future president decide that they want to change or get rid of those tax rates, cuts, whatever. So that's in this legislation. It also introduces some new tax breaks, incentives. The standard deduction is set to increase. There's going to be a $6,000 senior deduction. There's going to be child-related savings accounts, and then tip and overtime deductions. Now, those are limited. In fact, the senior deduction, I believe, is what is commonly referred to as no tax on Social Security. But there's a note that there's a limit. It's not just no tax on any Social Security. It's up to the first, I believe it's $6,000. I believe that's what this is telling me. The same is true for tips and overtime. Overtime, I forget the figure, but it's not on all overtime. It's up to a certain amount, and the same is true for tips. I want to say tips is $25,000. Overtime, I know I heard the number, but it's escaping me at the moment. So that's going to be in this legislation. There are raises to the SALT cap. What is the SALT cap? That is state and local taxes cap. That is going to be raised to $40,000. This is something that was changed when it went to the Senate. The House bill went to the Senate. They changed the SALT cap. Now, what's the SALT cap? So, effectively, if you pay, or we all pay state and local taxes, but the state and local taxes we pay in our states are deducted or can be deducted from our federal income liability, what we're supposed to pay in federal taxes. But there is a limit. There is a cap. So in other words, the government is basically saying here, we are not, if you live in a state where they are oppressing you through heavy taxation, and we can't ignore the fact that, we can't write all that off. We still need taxes. I mean, take for this whatever you wish. There's lots of things to take from this. You could say, why are not all of these taxes deductible? I could see that perspective. I could also see the perspective that says, hey, why are people in blue states allowing themselves to be taxed into oblivion? They got to get some control there so that they won't be complaining about being double taxed effectively. I mean, you could make that argument. It's different taxing entities. But the bill raises the SALT cap to $40,000, which means whatever you're paying in state and local taxes up to $40,000 is not going, you're going to be able to write that off, your federal taxes. For the $40,000 and first dollar, that dollar, you're going to have to pay a tax on that as though it wasn't, you can't just write that off as a tax paid to the state or the state and local taxes. So there's that. The debt limit will be raised by $4 to $5 trillion, and it's projected to add, by the CBO, 2.4 to 3.3 to the budget deficit by 2034, $1 trillion, if I didn't say that, by 2034. So what does that mean? Well, whenever the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and this is something I want to talk about a little bit later because Trump says these numbers are not right. They don't have a dynamic scoring system. They're living in a universe where everything is static. They're not looking at the positive impact that the tax cuts, permanent tax cuts, and other provisions we have in this are going to have. The economic impact that this is going to have is actually going, Trump says, is going to erase this deficit. This is what causes, this is, I would say, the key portion of this whole thing. Whatever's in this, Republicans are now saying they're going to, according to the reports by the CBO, which is supposed to be nonpartisan, and is supposed to just be doing the math. But it's never that simple. It's never that simple. You always have to make certain assumptions. You always have to determine what factors we are going to, consider as part of this legislation. What assumptions are we making? How much of an impact is this, that, or the other going to have? And which of those things are we even going to take into consideration? It would be like if you just started doing a diet and you had a negative caloric intake for the day, just based on, let's just say I decided I'm going to eat 500 calories less for each day. Well, over the course of 7 days, that's 3,500 calories, which on paper translates into 1 pound of fat loss. Excuse me. So, but if I started exercising as well, then that deficit might actually be greater. But if the arithmetic, if the formula I used did not take into account the impacts of exercise, it might have a different impact in my total weight loss and fitness. Also, I could gain muscle, right? I could gain muscle. I might not move the scale because maybe I'm losing fat and gaining muscle, and I'm actually getting in better shape, but I'm not moving the scale very much or as much as I would like to. Perhaps even in some crazy instances, you could gain weight while getting into better shape. And the point here is to say that the CBO doesn't take into all of those things into consideration when coming up with its score, but yet the reality is this is the only thing that we have to go from as well. So they always look 10 years into the future, and they say over the next 10 years, we estimate that there's going to be an impact to the budget deficit by this amount, this range. And they estimate $2.4 to $3.3 trillion is what it's going to add to our overall debt in the next 10 years. That's their estimate. Trump challenges this. Trump doesn't like this. Trump says that this is wrong, and he very well might be right in what he's saying here. But that is what is currently projected. So, more to say about this. Before I get there, though, my friends, let me remind you, Red, White, and Brand is here to help you put your logo on almost anything. You know, if you've listened to this program, I actually had a company years ago, before I started this show, where we helped folks do this very thing. I sold the business back in 2019. There was a 6-year non-compete, and lo and behold, that non-compete vanished here a month or two ago, a month and a half ago. And we decided that we were going to start offering those services again. We've done that under the umbrella of Red, White, and Branded. You can put your logo on almost anything, and that could be, again, signage, trade show banners, pop-up banners. It can be promotional products. It can be awards and recognition. It can be backdrops if you have media events and you want something behind you. It can be any number of things, my friends. Apparel, hats, coats, beanies, t-shirts. Your logo on almost anything. Redwhiteandbrand.com is the website. Go to redwhiteandbrand.com. Promo code Todd will save you 10%. And if you order online, you don't have to, but if you order online, you will get free shipping as well. Redwhiteandbrand.com, promo code Todd. All right, so let's look. There's spending increases in this bill as well. Now, spending increases that most conservatives are at least, it's the type of spending that falls under the things that government should be doing. Now, you can say we shouldn't be increasing spending anywhere. I would be at least open to that to a point, especially if we're not cutting anything, but there are cuts. But there are increases as well. Where are we increasing spending? Defense and border security. $150 billion for defense, and between $70 and $100 billion for immigration enforcement, deportations, the border wall, expansion of ICE, detention, and so forth to get deportation, border security and deportations, which of course are vitally important to what we're trying to do, what Trump is trying to do here in his second term. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a moment, and I want to tell you, you might know that out there looming about 5 years away is the 2030 census. Now, we've talked about this briefly before. This is one of those things that it happens every 10 years. There's a census. There's a count taken of people living in the United States. And when we count the people living in the United States, a lot of things happen. One thing that happens is that we determine, of course, the population of the country, which then we say, what are the populations of the states? And then we look at the math and we say, okay, let's determine how many representatives each state gets. You might recall from your Constitution, from your history and civics lessons, that every state in this union has 2 senators, but not every state has an equal number of representatives. Every state is entitled to at least 1 representative, and then from there, they are apportioned based upon effectively the percentage of the population that your state's population, the percentage of the overall national population that your state's population accounts for. That is your percentage, your apportionment of representatives. Now, there's got to be rounding. There's no perfect math here. You can't have 0.37 of a representative, although there's certainly representatives that are in Congress that I would say don't amount to 0.37 of a representative. But that's another story, another conversation for another day. We also determine, based upon that census, how many federal dollars are allocated for each part of the country, which again, I'm not a fan of this in particular. I think it's crazy that we send our dollars to Washington, D.C., and then the states have to basically comply with federal rules to get federal dollars. I think it made much more sense the way that it initially started, which was States had a certain amount of taxes that they were responsible for regarding funding the federal government, again, based upon the size of their state. And that's whatever the federal budget was. If their population was 10%, they were responsible, I mean, in general terms, for 10% of the federal expenses. And the state would have to write the check or send the cash or the gold or whatever to Washington, D.C. We've lost doing that. So as we look at deportations, if Trump continues and he gets more resources, more funding, they continue these raids, they've shut down the border, there's no more people coming across illegally, and they're going to start removing people from this country because they're here illegally. The law says that they can do that. Everything here that's happening is 100% within the rule of the law. And since the census counts everybody, as a court has ruled, as a Biden executive order has also discussed, this is the sort of thing that can cause havoc in a country. There are actually states that have representatives, have congressional seats that they would not have if they did not have such a high proportion of illegal aliens. And so this is tied together. This is tied back into politics, especially as we move toward the 2030 census. Just keep that in mind. And that impacts not just your representatives, that also impacts your electoral votes, your state's electoral votes. You get the number of congressional seats that you have, plus the 2 senators. That's your state's electoral votes. So this is impacting, again, illegal immigration is 100% impacting how tax dollars are spent. Make no mistake about this. How tax dollars are spent and how much political power your state has in terms of electoral votes. This has impacted, this has influenced elections inappropriately. It's influenced the expense, the federal spending of dollars. So I have to pause here. There's also, really quickly, rural and infrastructure funding, about $50 billion to rural hospitals and emergency services. This is due to the cuts to Medicare. This is to try to prevent there being a problem with funding these rural communities that are more susceptible to higher, Medicaid billings and so forth. And then $1 billion have been extended for nuclear loan programs. So that's all I can say. I'm up against the clock here, my friends. Want to remind you as well that you're probably tired. You may be tired if you've paid attention, which I know most of you do, where your money is going. That's one of the things we've really learned over the past few years. If you're tired of giving money to businesses that turn around and support leftist causes, that's exactly why we created Freedom Marketplace. It's a free searchable directory of businesses that share your conservative values. These are businesses that have vowed not to support leftist candidates and leftist causes, just good patriotic businesses pushing in the same direction you are. You can check it out today at freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. Quick timeout for me, my friends. Back here in just a minute.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome back, my friends. So let's continue talking about what's in this one big, beautiful bill. Let's talk about the pros and cons here really quickly as we get to that as well. There are cuts to social programs and welfare. Medicare is expected to have approximately, maybe just south of or slightly more than $1 trillion in cuts. They've imposed work requirements, and there is a projection that's out there. There's a projection that's out there that's being talked about by the left that says 11 to 12 million people are going to lose their coverage. Republicans say this is whatever the number of people that are not going to be on Medicaid, they are not going to be people who are those who qualify for it. This is going to come in the form of cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. This is these cuts are going to cover, say, Republicans. These cuts are going to cover the people who are here illegally that have been taking advantage of Medicare. And this has been happening. I mean, it is amazing to me how the left denies this stuff. There's evidence of this. And then not only that, literally right now, go out there and look. You'll find that there are politicians who are arguing, and look at this Zoran Mamdani, I should say, of New York City. He's running for mayor. That's what today's Todd Talk was about. I raised the question, have the left nominated, the Democrat Party nominated a communist for mayor? He may not be a communist according to what they tell us, but my, oh my, he's doing one heck of an impression. He's talking about controlling the means of production. I thought I was reading, when I was reading a transcript of his speech and some of the things that he said, I thought I was reading a transcript from the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx. No, it's Zoran Mamdani out there. So, but if you look, there are literally fights over this, fights routinely about states trying to give free education to illegal immigrants, other benefits for illegal immigrants, and then they go to tell us that there's not waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. I mean, it's preposterous. But nonetheless, Republicans say that's where these cuts are going to come from. They're going to come from people, even American citizens, who are fraudulently abusing Medicaid. I just saw there were, I forget the program. I just saw this yesterday. There was a program that was being reportedly defrauded, and there were a couple of hundred charges brought against a couple hundred people for doing this. I read it. I can't remember what it was, but this sort of thing exists. This sort of thing exists. Republicans say that's where these cuts are going to come from. There's also, for food stamps, the SNAP program, new work mandates, and there are administrative funding limits. They've cut some green energy policies in this bill. There are blocks to how Medicaid funding can be used, in particular to Planned Parenthood for at least 1 year. At least 1 year. Keep that in mind. Medicaid and Planned Parenthood, that should not happen. But regardless, this is in the bill as well. And there is that AI regulatory clause that says that banning states that try to regulate AI, they're banned from doing so at the state level for 10 years. All right. So I already told you that the deficit, the CBO predicts the deficit to be somewhere in the $2.5 trillion, getting close to $3 trillion of overall deficit debt added to this, to our national debt over the course of the next 10 years. There's also estimates there's approximately 11 million fewer people that are going to be insured primarily through Medicaid, but again, I've already addressed that. And there could be some job losses, again, according to CBO projections, from the cuts in green energy funding and all that sort of stuff. So, this has passed, a version of this has passed the House. The version I just talked about is what came out of the Senate. Not all of those things were in the original House bill, which means, you know, from studying government and civics and just being an adult who understands how your country works, this goes back to the House. The House has to vote on this, which again, I mean, the House was dealing with razor-thin margins the first time. We'll see if they can get it done here. It literally was 215 to 214 with one vote in abstention. So we'll see how this pans out. I think they'll be able to get this over the finish line. There were 3 Republicans in the Senate who did not vote for this. That was Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, who was upset of the impact it had on the national deficit, which is what I want to talk about next. Tom Tillis, he's concerned that these Medicaid cuts are actually going to be, he's from North Carolina, by the way. He's concerned that this is going to cut Medicaid for people in his state and in rural communities in general. He, by the way, has announced he's not running for re-election. And then the third Republican to vote against this in the Senate was Susan Collins. Susan Collins wanted to make sure that Medicaid was protected and that rural hospitals had what they needed to do, especially since a lot of them rely more heavily as an overall percentage on Medicaid funding for people that they're serving and treating. So, now there was money put in the bill for that, $50 billion for hospitals in rural communities. Now, there also, you'll know a name that I didn't mention there, who actually voted for this, was Lisa Murkowski. She's a Republican, a rhino from Alaska. She did vote for this. If she didn't, this thing would have died in the Senate. So I can't go through it all because I really want to focus on another part of this, but there were some concessions made to Lisa Murkowski to get her vote, and some people are upset at that, and understandably so. Some additional things, bonuses, whatever, that were given out in exchange for her vote for the support of Alaskans. Anyway, don't want to get into all of that. This is politics. This is the way that it worked. What I want to talk about is why Trump is saying that this is not going to increase the deficit. Because to me, there's a lot of things in this bill that are good. There are some things that are questionable, maybe not good. I'm taking out, leaving aside here the overall increase to the deficit. I'm questioning whether that is accurate or not. The bill itself has a lot of good things that are going to be good for this country. Now, the question about the deficit, that's a bad thing. And so, here I am, someone who's, talked about this with you. Some of you have listened to us for 10 years. We've gone through this. You know that I've railed against spending. Spending is a massive problem that this country has faced. It is something that has to be addressed. I get tired of people kicking the can down the road to the next generation. And constantly we've been told, wait until next time. Next time we'll do it right. Oh, we had to compromise here, but next time we've got the perfect solution. I've listened to this stuff, I'm not kidding you, for 25 years. 25 years. This was, by the way, this happened with illegal immigration. Nothing happened. I remember in the Bush years, this was a problem. We didn't do anything. Not until Trump came along did we do anything. And so it's maddening because this is a massive problem that has tremendous ramifications. And now the CBO is saying that this is going to add $2.5 to $3 trillion to our debt in the next 10 years, which is inexcusable, right? If it's true. Do we trust the CBO's estimates? The CBO's estimates, I would say, are never right. But how are you going to, it's not an easy math problem. It's not 2 plus 2. Right? There are so many factors, and there's so many things that are going to be implemented and that happen after this bill takes effect that are just impossible to account for. But is this basic calculation correct or way off the mark? That's what I want to talk about in the next segment, my friends. Think about this for a moment. Our investments are like seeds that we plant. They grow, they multiply, but are they bearing the kind of fruit that we want? At 4-8 Financial, they believe our money should reflect our values. They specialize in wealth management and what they call biblically responsible investing, where they screen out companies that do not align with the Christian faith. It's all about their purpose-centered financial planning, helping you live a life of meaning and purpose. You want to see if your current investments align with your values? All you have to do is go to 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. You can have that assessment done. It's totally free. 48 Financial, they're here to help help you. They're here to worry about your money. So you don't have to do that, my friends. I got to take a break. Quick time out. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Here we are, the third and final segment of this Todd Huff Show. I know time goes fast when you're listening to this program. Can't blame you for feeling that way. So, if we just look at the information we have been given by the CBO, if we just look at the amount of deficit that this adds to our national debt over the course of the next 10 years, this is very hard to get behind. But there is the possibility that the CBO is not properly calculating the impact of this legislation. Now, I will say that the CBO is constant. It's never right, but we don't have anything else out there to go by. This is the only measurable thing. I mean, you could have independent groups tally stuff up, but then, of course, people are going to say, well, this group wants this legislation passed, who funded it? Those are all fair questions. These are complicated and very just hard to assess situations. So I understand that. I also understand that we have just found our way through, or in the midst of, this tariff war, this trade war, if you will. And it turns out, remember all those economists that came out that said that Trump's tariffs are going to put this country into a financial tailspin, the death spiral, as the left likes to say out there in the media, as I've seen. And that hasn't happened. In fact, the revenues being brought in from tariffs is a significant number. A significant number of dollars are being collected by the federal government because of the tariffs. Now, and it hasn't impacted us in the negative ways that a lot of these projections and doomsday prognosticators told us that it would. Doesn't mean that they were wrong to raise the question, but it does mean that they were wrong in stating emphatically that it would absolutely turn out the way that they told us, because it hasn't done that. I would remind you of that as you analyze and think about this. So Trump's team says, look, there's a few reasons why we question the $2.5 roughly to $3 trillion that this bill is supposed to add to the federal debt. The first is that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, it uses a type of scoring system that is static. It underestimates the impact of economic growth. And Trump's team believes that the tax cuts are going to stimulate things like investment, hiring, productivity. And when those things happen, even though tax cuts are made permanent, you take a lower percentage of a bigger number that's produced by an economy. At some point, that lower percentage of a bigger number is bigger than a higher percentage of a lower number. And Trump's team says they're not adequately accounting for just how much we can grow ourselves out of this. And I certainly believe that they are correct here. I don't know if they're 100% correct. I don't know if this will be deficit neutral over the course of 10 years. And candidly, there's going to be no way of ever knowing, because there's going to be other legislation that'll impact other things that happen. And it's virtually impossible to measure this in and of itself, because there's going to be other laws and changes and things that happen that, just are impossible to account for when you're making your projections here. But Trump's team says, hey, that's a big factor. Trump also says that the tightening of the reins on things like Medicaid and food stamps, SNAP, is also going to reduce long-term expenditures in a way that's not properly being fully accounted for here. By producing additional traditional energy, here in this country, not the green stuff, but the traditional type of energy. Trump's team says that there will be a generation of new revenue streams from the lease sales, the royalties, the exports from traditional energy production, drill baby drill sort of stuff. There's going to be revenue there as well that's not being fully accounted for, Trump's team says. And then there is this thing that's called the private sector multiplier effect. That is when the private sector expansion, when it's freed from what it considers regulatory and tax burdens, that will result in GDP growth in a sustained, consistent way that will offset some short-term deficits. Now that, again, could be closely related to the first point, but the bottom line here is that there are answers to the questions, or to the, maybe I should even say there are questions that the CBO is not able to answer when it comes to them just giving us a number that we're supposed to believe to be absolutely true and absolutely the case. They're $2.5 to $3 trillion roughly. That's the amount of money they say is going to be added to the federal deficit over the next 10 years. Trump's team is saying, look, it's not going to be that. Trump's probably even out there saying it's not going to be any of this because he's very bullish on our economy. I am too. I'm inclined to believe Trump here. By the way, not happy with everything that's in here, but this is the best we're going to do. You can see that with the votes. It's razor thin in both chambers of Congress. So anyway, I got to run. SDG.